Minutes past the hour now, so we're going to get started. Hey everyone, it's great to see so many of you joining us today. We're really grateful that you have chosen to spend this time with us. My name is Murray Simpson. I am the Vice President of Growth at SimpsonScarborough. I have the honor and the pleasure of being your host and MC for the next 60 minutes. So today we're here to share our first replication of the website and marketing technology study in higher ed. So for those of you who haven't attended previous presentations about this study, we launched it back in 2021 with our partners over at Pantheon to really understand higher ed's usage and ambitions of MarTech. Most notably, it was about the website. So today we're really going to look at how our industry has moved since 2021. Before we dive in, I wanted to take a moment to introduce the team we've got today. First, we've got Tina Lee. I don't know if you can see her. I don't know how Zoom works, but Tina Lee is here. She's one of our account directors. Tina's worked on a large number of our partners' websites, bringing digital strategy and brand alignment together. So Tina knows firsthand some of the challenges that come when building and socializing websites, especially for those decentralized institutions. We're also joined by McLean, who's our AVP of Digital, aka the leader of our web division at SimpsonScarborough. And Marcus drives our digital innovation and advises our clients on everything from CMS integration to using AI on your website. And he'll be sharing some insights on those topics today. We then have a live Q&A, so we're hopeful we'll get through our presentation in about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. We're joined by Scott Massey from Pantheon, which is one of the leading website ops and governance platforms. So Scott has worked there for 12 years, helping shape web strategies for universities all over America. And finally, we've got our very own Bob and Meredith, who've both been the brains behind all of the data you're going to see today. So these folks are also going to be active in the chat, and they'll be adding context, some insights as we walk through the data. But if you would like to ask questions throughout, please post these in the Q&A function of Zoom, and we'll either address them in the Q&A or throughout the presentation today. Okay, now that we've got through who everyone is, I wanted to start by setting the stage for today's conversation with just a quick overview of the study itself. This year we had 171 institutions participate, which was a slight uplift from our 2021 study. I did want to say if you're on the call and you took the time to provide your insights, then thank you, because we can't get this kind of industry-wide perspective without your input. For this study, we've focused exclusively on four-year not-for-profit institutions, and we really made a point to capture insights from the senior most individual responsible for the institution's website and MarTech stack, because these are really the people who have the deep understanding of the institution's digital strategy. And they form representation of central administration teams across the country. So today we are going to share industry-wide trends with you. In the coming weeks, we'll dive deeper, so we can do some additional segmentation down the line. But for today, we're going to give you some of those industry-wide trends. Before we jump into the findings from this year's study, I wanted to quickly recap what we found in 2021. 2021 was interesting. Many of us were still in lockdowns. COVID was still pretty prominent for a lot of us. There was a big surge in online learning, a lot of pivots to virtual events, and the role of technology in higher ed was shifting pretty dramatically. In this study, we looked largely at how institutions were performing when it came to their digital strategy and their setup internally. And the data really revealed that we were very much in our infancy. So only 32% of institutions had a cohesive website strategy. There were 30% of institutions who had fully integrated their CRM and CMS. 26% said they rarely assessed performance, and only 28% reviewed analytics monthly. When it came to governance and accessibility, these percentages seem to be where we were doing slightly stronger. 57% of institutions said Marcom had sole ownership of their web presence, and 50% of institutions had well-defined accessibility standards. So these insights at the time highlighted really a pressing need for more of the strategic alignment and the integration piece within higher ed. Now, we fast forward 4 years, and the question we now need to answer is, have we made any meaningful progress in these areas? And the answer is yes, we have made progress, but from our perspective, it's not as much progress as I think had expected or had hoped in the industry. So strategy in terms of having a cohesive web strategy was up to 39%, which is good, but it's still under half of institutions. With integrations, there was modest progress, with 36% now integrating CRM and CMS, but there's still a long way to go. These next two metrics seem to be where the most improvement has happened over the last 4 years. We've got measurement, where there's more positive trends for both reviewing analytics monthly and rarely assessing performance. And governance has had the biggest rise within higher ed, one of the most standout improvements, with 75% of institutions now reporting sole ownership of their web presence by Marcom. And we are going to dig into that data point in this presentation. And then accessibility slipping slightly, with only 46% maintaining well-defined standards. And I'm sure we'll dive into that more in the Q&A. So what I always find quite reassuring with bringing the higher ed community together in these webinars is that we often think our institutions are behind. But then you join something like this and you're like, oh, it's the industry that's behind. We're not the only one without a cohesive web strategy. And hopefully that makes you feel a little bit less alone. But regardless, we don't want the industry to be behind. And the data here shows we still have work to do. Because whilst we're seeing pockets of improvement, many institutions are still stuck in the early stages of digital maturity. So in some areas like governance, we're moving in the right direction. In others like measurement and accessibility, progress has been slightly slower and less consistent. So we want to focus the presentation today diving more into the data points to show you how to improve so that in 4 years' time, we're doing even better. So we're going to go deeper into these different areas. Tina's going to start off with ownership and governance. We'll dive into different ownership models and why it matters. Marcus will then cover strategy, measurement, integrations, and AI, and why connecting your tech stack is so important. And then Tina will cover, with education and buy-in, how best to socialize websites on campus that are going to last for the future. And I'll then come back at the end as MC and give you an overview of our new .edu maturity model. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Tina to start talking about ownership and governance.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tina Lee. I'm an account director, as Mary mentioned, and I'm happy to kick off our first section here. I want to share some data points that we found from our study that help paint the picture for ownership and governance in the current higher education landscape. A growing trend we see is that the marketing communications function is driving, and that's a good thing. How are we seeing this trend growing? First, we are seeing this in the reporting structure. Marketing and communications have more MarTech leads reporting into them. That has increased by 32%. There's also been a decrease in the MarTech lead reporting to IT only. This tells us there is more value placed in aligning MarTech with Marcom. It's not simply seen as part of the tech stack, but as a brand asset. Next, we also see a trend toward Marcom driving when it comes to ownership. The owner of the primary web presence has drastically shifted. We've moved away from ownership being with IT only, or even that shared ownership between Marcom and IT, and instead moved toward sole Marcom ownership. That's gone up by 26%. This tells us there is more strategic alignment to who the primary audience is, and that you're leveraging your website as a critical recruitment tool for prospects and not this catch-all hub or content dumping ground. We see that MarTech lead role itself is also shifting. VP representation is up, and MarTech officers at the director level has gone down. There's been a 42% increase in MarTech leaders at the VP AVP level, which means the role is being further elevated with the lead MarTech officer having a more senior seat at the table, which is great. There's acknowledgement of the essential role MarTech plays in the institution's Marcom efforts, and it's also signaling to us that strategic senior level leadership in MarTech matters. And finally, we saw a drop of 59% in the website being siloed, department run within the institution. There's a concerted effort happening towards centralizing that control. However, governance is still catching up. Governance is on the rise, but is it effective? When we think about governance, we're talking about the framework around ownership and collaboration, the policies and processes in place, the roles and responsibilities that help strategically guide your website. When there's a lack of governance, this creates more fracture across the institution. It's really important to bring all parts together to fit. Imagine them as puzzle pieces forming the full picture. When teams know who owns what, how decisions are made, and where to turn for guidance, the website becomes less of a battleground and more of a brand asset. The real power of governance is not control, it's coherence. Pay close attention to how your institution is emphasizing website governance. You want to map closer to Marcom and focus on collaboration. I'll share this example. We recently conducted a web audit for a client that revealed there were over 30,000 pages. That makes it extremely difficult to govern. We really feel for you all when you have that many pages. Content ownership and management was decentralized, and there were gaps in critical resources needed to streamline the workflow and reestablish governance with Marcom at the helm. So to address these challenges, our team defined a content partnership model. This model clearly established the department level responsibilities versus the marketing responsibilities, and also where these functions could collaborate. The purpose of that is to create clear ownership and workflow, maintain content integrity, improve user journeys, and unify the digital experience, all with the goal towards long-term sustainability for the website. We also proposed a web team structure that identified key hires, including a web director who provides leadership and strategic oversight. The web director acts as a liaison between Marcom and leadership, and this role takes ownership of the overall web strategy and also manages the web team. We also introduced the role of content coordinator. For this particular institution, we recommended 2 content coordinators to meet their content management needs. These coordinators work with academic and administrative stakeholders to collect and maintain the content, and they collaborate closely with the web developer and content strategist. In this particular case, the design function is part of a separate reporting line. So this is just one example of how we evaluate an institution's current state of affairs and provide a customized approach to governance that is both adaptable and also beneficial for that long-term maintenance of the website. To put a fine point on ownership and governance, remember, determine who owns what when it comes to your website. Minimize the number of website owners and establish governance for coherence, not control. As you evaluate your web presence and approach your redesign projects, consider these key takeaways based on the shifts that we're already seeing in the higher education digital landscape. Marcus will talk about the next critical area that is shaping the future of digital maturity in higher education.
Thanks, Tina. All right, so let's talk about strategy and measurement. We'll be looking at this through the lens of a website redesign because that's generally the best time to take a step back and see the bigger picture. We're seeing that when it comes to strategy, more and more institutions are developing a unified strategy for the website itself compared to 2021. But we're seeing a downtick in the website's alignment with the institution's strategic plan as a whole. So the website strategy is a bit isolated in that regard. So we've got some room for improvement there. One reason we're seeing a decline in overall alignment is because the time since an institution's last website redesign has been increasing since 2021. At this point, 20% of .edu websites are now over 5 years old, and nearly half of them haven't been redesigned in 3 or more years. Now, think about what's happened in the last 5 years. GA4 was released in late 2020. ChatGPT was released in late 2022. So the best thing we can do is prepare ourselves for this changing landscape, and website redesign is the best time to do that. At its core, a website redesign is just straight up a MarTech opportunity. That's because redesigns generally involve setting a new technical foundation for the website. So it's much easier to make structural changes that affect how your teams work together. So why do a redesign? A lot of people think it's mostly just to make the site look better, but there's so much more to it than that. We're going to cover a handful of reasons why you should do a redesign beyond the site's going to be pretty. A redesign will definitely make your site look better. Arguably more important, however, it can be used to establish alignment with the brand. And that's not just visuals, that could be tone and voice or even the student experience. A redesign is also an opportunity to improve your measurement. You can collect more data and higher quality data when measurement is integrated within the design process. Redesigns also present a chance to integrate with other technologies your team is already leveraging. A really useful example of this is a CRM to CMS integration. And finally, a redesign sets the foundation for your institution to lead in a future defined by AI. So let's start off with brand and an example that takes us back to governance. We're currently working with a large institution, and as part of our discovery process, we learned that they have over 600 active websites. Now, it's pretty common for our clients to have what's known as a decentralized governance model. Basically, each school, department, or office is responsible for their own web presence. But when you've got over 600 websites, there's a lot to keep track of, let alone maintain. With so many different digital properties, individual administrative units often have difficulty adhering to brand standards. And there are a ton of redundant code bases floating around. The whole process could be a lot more efficient. Thankfully, there are technical solutions to these problems. And with the right amount of planning and institutional buy-in, they can be implemented in a pretty straightforward manner. So let's take those 600 sites I was just talking about and throw them into a couple of buckets. You've got the main EDU property, websites for individual schools and colleges, departmental websites, and websites for individual offices, just to name a few. And let's say that one of our primary objectives is to make sure they're all on brand. For years, the individual sites have gone rogue, and now it's time to reel them back in. When you're doing the strategic planning for a website, it's important to consider its foundation, the content management system, or CMS. You've probably heard of at least one CMS like Drupal, WordPress, Cascade, Modern Campus, Terminal 4. There are a lot of CMSs, but many of them have a way for you to spin up a new website or web property and put some guardrails on it. Maybe you want to control which types of pages people can create, or you want to establish an approval process before content is published. Or maybe you want to make sure that data is being collected whenever a visitor of your website interacts with the filter on your programs page. Instead of having a bunch of disparate properties with competing designs, data flows, and code bases, you can serve everything up from one central location, even if there are hundreds of people editing the website at once. It also makes maintenance easier. So when you want to update the site, say you want to make a design change or add a tracking pixel, you make that change in one spot and it gets pushed to every site in the system. This is the sort of stuff you can do when you take a step back and look at the bigger picture. So let's talk about measurement. The first thing we want to say about measurement is that at this point, measurement is no longer a nice to have. It's a requirement. And you're going to see why in just a second. When it comes to measurement, we've seen real growth. In 2021, 25% of institutions said they rarely assess performance. Today, that number's been cut down to 9%. So that's a 62% decrease since we last did the study. When it comes to analytics performance, we've got 30% more institutions reviewing the web analytics on a monthly basis. That's 28% in 2021, up to 37% in 2025. It's a big increase. But it's not just more measurement, it's deeper measurement. More institutions are combining web and CRM data. This isn't just a tech integration, it's a cultural evolution. We're seeing teams shift from reactive reporting to proactive storytelling with data, with 21% more institutions combining the web analytics with CRM data. But we need to think about which data points we're tracking. You're all probably familiar with KPIs like inquiries or applications completed. Institutions are treating data as a decision tool, not just a retrospective. So when used well, analytics guide content priorities, redesign decisions, and resource allocations. GA4 might be the tool, but the real change is happening in how institutions are asking smarter questions and finally starting to answer them. But just turning GA4 on isn't enough. Filters, goals, events, and data streams must be aligned with institutional strategy. Otherwise, you're left with dashboards that look impressive, they don't actually say anything useful. The institutions gaining traction in this space aren't just collecting data. They're structuring the reporting to reflect on what matters most. That means aligning KPIs with goals, cleaning up historical data, training teams to read reports critically, and creating space for data to inform decisions. Now we can dig deeper with our measurement plan beyond basic enrollment metrics. Here you can see some more granular KPIs and events to track. Take a look at the column on the right. In the middle of that list is an event called Program Compare. Now imagine this. When users compare two programs on your site using a program comparison feature, you can see which programs they're comparing and use that data as you're designing the programs. So let's look at a concrete measurement example. In this example, our client, Northeastern University, was interested in understanding how site visitors were using their program filter. Specifically, they wanted to know which filters were being interacted with the most and which programs were being saved and compared against. Think about the insights you can get with data at this level. These are the sorts of things you can access when you do proper measurement planning. With this data, you can ask questions like, do we need two programs here? How does that inform modality? What about tuition? What about location? Program design is really expensive, so you want to make sure that you have the right data going into that exercise, and measurement is the perfect way to help. So how do you create a measurement plan? Well, you start with your business goals. For this example, we'll be focusing on improving enrollment. Now, what are the ways a website can help achieve that goal? Well, students can apply online, and they can also request additional information. So let's turn those into website goals and call them receive applications and receive inquiries. Next, how do you measure that? Well, when it comes to receiving applications, that happens when the user clicks the apply button. So let's measure that. For receiving inquiries, that happens when the user submits the RFI form. So we'll measure that as well. Finally, it's a good idea to set up annual targets because these are the benchmarks we'll use to compare data over time. All right, now it's time to talk about integrations and AI. It's really important that we consider these areas because that positions us to thrive in a future that's increasingly shaped by evolving technologies. Big takeaway here, we haven't seen much movement in the CRM to CMS integrations, which is interesting because there are a lot of benefits. We'll get into that in a bit. Back in 2019, institutions said CRM, CMS integration was in the works. In 2021, they still hadn't done it. And in 2025, for most institutions, still not done. Sure, 21% more institutions are now combining analytics across systems, but the full integration remains elusive. Without it, you can't personalize effectively. You can't score leads intelligently. You can't automate meaningfully. The tech exists and the opportunity is clear. So what's the barrier? It's a lack of strategy and prioritization. So it's time to fix that. So here we have a couple of examples of the benefits of the CMS to CRM integration. First up, when a student requests info on the website, you can enrich that lead with metadata, like the time spent on the site and the number of pages viewed. A lead that spends a lot of time on your site is generally going to be hotter than a lead that only spends a few moments. So you would score that lead that spent more time on your site higher. That's intel that you can use to help your team strategically prioritize their efforts. Next, when that lead visits your website again, you can personalize their experience. Say they've been browsing engineering programs. Armed with this data, you can serve up engineering-related content in strategic areas of the website. Finally, when a lead visits the website, you can see their behavioral journey throughout the site. You can then use that information to tailor your outreach and make decisions about future program offerings. When you commit to a CRM to CMS integration, the result is a system that empowers your enrollment team with up-to-date information and reduces a lot of manual effort. Now let's switch gears to AI. Of the institutions using AI in this study, 69% of them are currently using it to refine content. That's a testament to how impactful this technology truly is. We strongly believe that AI isn't going anywhere. In fact, it's going to be a bigger paradigm shift than the internet itself. And AI comes with a lot of benefits, but there are some things that, especially right now, AI isn't great at. One trend we're seeing is a notable drop in content quality. It's sort of like how Google search results have steadily gotten worse over the years as both site authors and Google itself have prioritized ad revenue over quality content. By leaning too heavily on AI producing what is essentially watered down recycled content, you're going to be going down the same road as Google, and you won't be making content people actually want. We've come up with a term for this type of degradation that occurs when teams rely too heavily on AI. We call it JPEGification. It's when everything looks fine at first glance, but upon further inspection, it lacks depth. So everyone knows what a JPEG is, right? You take a photo with your phone, boom, there's a JPEG. What everyone might not know is that JPEGs are what's called lossy data formats. That means when you save an image as a JPEG, you irretrievably lose some amount of data in the process. It works that way because if you kept all the data, the file size of the image would be massive, and we'd all have these huge, prohibitively expensive phones that wouldn't even fit into our pockets. That is to say, some data loss is completely acceptable. But what happens if you save a JPEG of a JPEG? So you have an original image, turn that into a JPEG, and then you save that JPEG as another JPEG. So you go through 2 steps of data loss. Now what happens if you do that 2,000 times? That's exactly what's happening on this slide. You can see that the image gradually degrades into what appears to be static noise, essentially no information at all, because by that point, it's all been lost in the process. The key takeaway is this: if you want a good copy of something, copy the source, not the derivative. So let's take that thinking into the world of AI. Okay, so this is my favorite slide in this entire deck. You might have seen this animation on social media, but if you haven't, here's what's going on. Some person on the internet put a photo of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson into ChatGPT and said, "Hey, ChatGPT, please replicate this image of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson exactly. Don't change anything." And ChatGPT said, "Okay, person on the internet, I will replicate this image of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson exactly. I won't change a thing." And then ChatGPT's interpretation of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was fed back into ChatGPT to create another replication of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And then the ChatGPT centipede repeated this for 100 generations. At some point, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson turns into some other dude, and then, I don't know, a clown. And then that clown turns into abstract art. It's uncanny, to say the least. At its core, JPEGification is what happens when data is irretrievably lost between subsequent replications of data. Now, we just showed it in picture format because it's really easy to see how things can go wrong, but this can happen with text, audio, and video as well. As a textual example, we have a graph of how much the word delve shows up in research paper titles or abstracts. Right around 2022, it just skyrockets, and it's no coincidence that ChatGPT was released that same year. Now imagine doing this on an institutional scale. Clearly, this has some really important consequences. First, AI isn't always right. We saw from the previous slide how bad ChatGPT is at replicating an image of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And second, you can really dilute your brand when ChatGPT is constantly inserting words like delve and seamless. That's another telltale ChatGPT word. The bottom line is you're really watering down your web experience by using AI as a replacement for great content. All this is to say, AI is a supplement, not a replacement. So for making quick edits, that's no problem. But if you're writing your entire website with AI, you might want to reconsider. What you really want to do is be an authoritative source of information. In the not so distant future, machine to machine communication will vastly outweigh human to machine. You'll have your own personal AI that will talk to other AIs, known as agents, to complete tasks like finding out how much tuition is at public universities in the Northeast. Your best bet is to make sure the information on your website is accurate, up to date, and ready for machine consumption. So if you haven't built the website this way, make sure in your brief you're looking for ways to structure your data. So let's tie it all together. The future of the web is query-based, not click-based. So when you rely on ChatGPT's default knowledge, as in the top example, you get something that's more watered down because it's error-prone and it's already passed through so many rounds of content degradation. But when you have high-quality content that's structured for machine consumption, and you feed that data into an AI that's tuned specifically for your institution, as in the bottom example, you get the content that people actually want. Okay, that's enough about AI. And with that, I'll hand it back to Tina to talk about education, buy-in, and literacy.
Great. Now you have a governance plan, your strategy is in place, you've determined your measures for success, which is all great, but there needs to be a level of understanding for all of this to work effectively. Simply put, strategy without understanding doesn't work. When it comes to strategy, the website being a conglomeration of many disjointed properties, that's decreased from 29% to 23%. And we're seeing an increase across the board on a unified strategy, collaboration with units across campus for content and development needs, and collaboration across campus to set the website strategy. This is all very encouraging and great to see. The collaboration is happening, but how do you do it effectively? You can have the most sophisticated MarTech stack, the clearest governance model, and the most ambitious web strategy. But if stakeholders don't understand the why, the website becomes a free-for-all. Strategy sets the direction, governance puts it into motion, but education is what makes it stick. Education helps stakeholders across campus understand how the website serves the institution and how they're responsible for maintaining its integrity. The best .edu sites aren't just well built, they're well understood. When buy-in spreads, so does momentum. When it comes to building that momentum, here are 3 tips for socializing your website. Call it Socializing Your Website 101. 1, set the tone on what the site is and what it is not. 2, form a web committee to champion growth and evolution. And 3, conduct trainings and workshops rooted in your institution's culture. So starting with 1, how do you set the tone on what the site is and what it is not? Centralizing ownership with Marcom means creating a system of checks and balances to stay focused on the website's primary goal and avoiding burning through resources and budget due to multiple owners. Yes, it's important to have processes in place and be clear on roles and responsibilities, but sometimes all you need is a bit of tone setting, agreeing that everyone is oriented to the same goal. Emphasize that it's a recruitment tool, not an intranet. This can happen at some key points in the process, such as in the discovery phase when you're gathering insights on the current state of the website. You can use that moment to key folks in on how the redesign will happen and why. You can start to get stakeholders on the same page about how the process will provide data-driven insights for the website strategy. And then you can also do tone setting when the strategy is in place. Use this moment to make the future direction of the website clear. Stay focused on the big picture and invite your key stakeholders to share that vision. Next, form a web committee. This can be called a web steering committee or web advisory committee or even web governance committee. There could be many different names, but the point is that this committee should champion the growth and evolution of your website over time. Your website is living and breathing and meant to grow and evolve. It's not static. This committee should include representatives who understand the website's design system and the principles, as well as the thinking behind why decisions were made. When deciding who should be part of the committee, consider representatives from Marcom and IT. The committee should not only understand the website's design system and thinking, but also feel empowered to enforce and reinforce those decisions. They should continue to answer this critical question: how do you build the website so that people will keep using it later on down the road? And finally, conduct trainings and workshops rooted in your institution's culture. We all know knowledge is power. Sharing that knowledge is even more powerful in shaping champions and decreasing deterrents, those who start to move away from the website design system. When you work with us, we will provide many types of trainings and templates for your institution to use and build on. But we also know understanding the institution's culture shapes how we approach the training materials and also the level of depth that we get into. We take this part very seriously and build a training plan that will establish trust and encourage collaboration. We hope these 3 simple tips are helpful in ensuring your website redesign efforts are not in vain. We want you to build a strong foundation for your digital ecosystem.
Okay, so before we get to the final part of the webinar, which is our favorite part, all Q&A and talking about MarTech, I wanted just to spend a couple of minutes talking about how we actually measure digital maturity. You've heard of many different maturity models, and we're now introducing our .edu maturity model. So this is based on 54 metrics across 9 categories, everything from SEO and accessibility to brand consistency and integration. Best way to describe it as you look at the Lego blocks is it's a digital foundation where each block supports the next, building towards a truly optimized and define effectiveness of MarTech. So here's just a very quick closer look at those 9 categories. And you can see in here just a few of the metrics we assess within each. Now, this is just a sample, but it does give you a sense of how comprehensive the approach is to the maturity model. It's not just about the technical pieces here, it's about how these pieces all work together. So, how does that come together to form a maturity model? So we've broken it down into these 4 levels. If you're at level 1, you are in the 14% of responding institutions that are really just getting the basics in place when it comes to their MarTech ecosystem. So you've got a functional website, maybe you've got consistent branding, but you're still wrestling with an outdated CMS, scattered ownership, maybe that unified voice. So at level 1, the institutions are building the foundations, but they've still got a long way to go. If you're at level 2, you're in the 58% of other institutions. That's the largest group. So most institutions have moved beyond the basics, but still struggling to connect the dots. They might have a good handle on governance and IA, which we saw in the research reports, but still figuring out how to integrate systems and automate processes and embed AI. And again, those are the areas we're finding institutions are struggling with the most. So there's still a lot of gaps to fill in level 2. Then when you get to level 3, you're in the 23% that's starting to play a more strategic game. These institutions aren't just managing the website, they are actively optimizing it. They're using analytics to inform decisions, paying attention to accessibility, and really help drive institutional goals through their website. And if you're at level 4, the top level, very, very important, you are in the top 5% of institutions. That's very much the elite group that's truly outpacing the pack. They're not just thinking about today's website, it's really building a digital ecosystem. Looking back at what Marcus was talking about with both integrations and the ecosystem there between CRM and CMS, but also my new favorite word, JPEGification, and ensuring that AI and teams and systems are set up so that we are performing strongly on our SEO and our website performance. I will say with our model, you can't just ace like 1 or 2 categories to reach the top. Each level builds on the one before it. So we've built this model because we really want you to be able to show leadership back on campus where the gaps are in your operations using industry data. We've certainly found that's always the best way to get people to listen on campus. So if you took part in the study and you want to know where you fell in those percentages, just reach out to us on our website and we will get back to you with how you scored. And if you didn't take part, but you are curious about where your institution would land, we are going to open up the maturity model for people to do self-assessments. And that's just really a great opportunity. It's a small step that can lead to some big insights. And we would love to see where you land. So thank you very much for joining us today. Everyone who signed up will receive an email with a copy of the report where you can dive into the data even further and hopefully use some of that to shape conversations back on your campus. We hope you really enjoyed the content. We're now going to open up the Q&A where you can ask all of our team questions about any of the content today, but also just any other challenges that you're experiencing back on campus. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hand it over to Bob, who is our EVP, to start off the Q&A.
Thank you. All right, we have some questions in the chat, some that have already been submitted, and anybody who would like to submit something, you can do so at this point. I thought a good place to start. There was a recent question that was submitted around AI and how that affects affects uh, uh, affects click-through rates coming from search. And as we're thinking about that, I think that that's an interesting place to start because search is changing dramatically on its own. The amount of relevancy there versus what I think we think about the EDU in the future as the actual primary source of information. That's how we're going to need to start thinking about that, right? The content that's showing up in the EDU is going to be available through AI response answers outside of search, and the metrics we may have used in the past are now going to evolve towards new metrics that don't just consider what your inbound number of clicks might be coming through from organic search. So one of the topics that we explored today was around what measurement looks like. And I think when we think about what attribution is there for web measurement, one piece of that is certainly organic search, but then we also explored then and shared those insights around integration with the CRM itself. And I think that as much as we consider what attribution looks like from the website perspective, there's also still a lack of attribution happening on the marketing technology side within the CRM. And I'm wondering if Murray has any thoughts he can share around that.
Yeah, and I can see some questions in the chat as well about what CRM systems are we commonly seeing being integrated with CMSs. I think right now, I mean, you know all the main players of CRM in higher ed. I think Slate is probably the one that's used the most. But very often it's trying to identify what data do we need to integrate in the first place? Like what's going to be helpful for us? And Mark has touched on a lot of that. So many institutions are not capturing individual user behavior on the site into their CRM records. So I want to see if my prospective student has looked at 6 different programs. So that's going to inform my conversations with them as someone in admissions. So I think that gap is a really huge miss for a lot of marketing and enrollment operations because the website should be a front door to so many of those behaviors. Where we've seen institutions really move the needle is attribution when it comes to media, cost of acquisition, how does organic convert, even measurement of brand, like all those things are starting to move the needle. But that integration with CRM and CMS has grown with such a small percentage point in the last 4 years. So yeah, I honestly think we could do an hour on integrations. Marcus is actually doing a blog post about it coming up soon. So maybe we'll share that when it's published. But yeah, I think that is Bob, that would say is my biggest perspective is that's the miss, like defining what you want to track through and then pulling it in.
Awesome. There's a question in the chat for Tina about the role that the institution can play in terms of how we kind of get the governance model to a good space to include a lot of individual stakeholders and where we can really think about that in ways that might start to make content more clear and easier to find. Can you share some thoughts on that, Tina?
Yes, good question. I think this kind of harks back to my section around what key points in time you can start to have that, especially as you're starting to kick off your website project. So in the discovery phase, and then also as you're establishing the strategy for your website. I know sometimes, especially when it comes to silos and departments and just differences in goals, that's where forming a web committee can be really useful because that's where you're inviting folks in, whether we said specifically from like a Marcom and IT perspective, you want to have that representation, but this is an opportunity if there are department level folks who want their voice to be heard. And there's a difference between how you're using it in the way of having voices heard versus those who are steering more of the website goals and opportunities with the website. So that's where the nomenclature can also be effective, whether you're calling it governance, steering committee. But I think the committee really helps to establish among those in terms of inviting folks in from other departments, and then also using that group to help understand the strategy and reasons behind why the website exists.
Great. Scott, there was a question in the chat around multiple CRMs, and that just kind of leads me to think about that's one challenge universities have. They also have challenges with multiple technology solutions on the CMS side, which I know you're familiar with. In any of the digital transformation work that you've been involved with, potentially working with a CIO and a CMO that may have interests that need to be aligned, are there any learnings you can kind of share from that that might help us make the bridge to what this individual is asking?
Sure. Uh, you see this multiple CRMs. I see occasionally in higher ed, but I see pretty often in enterprise. And I think the lesson that the takeaway from the those kind of use cases is that it goes back to governance in a way. You really can't improve what you can't measure, and so a lot of times managing those different sets of tools has to start with unifying on what you're measuring and how you're measuring it, like particular KPIs across different teams and different, tool sets. And then I think being able to align on those is a starting point. And then with CRMs, it's kind of difficult to shuffle those together and make them work as smoothly. But with CMSs, it is a different story. Like you can have one university running off of multiple different CMSs, and the way that the technology works nowadays is you can build kind of one kind of profile that has your data model, has sort of your governance built into the CMS, and spin up sites off of that and build off of that. So at least at the maybe at the decision making level or exec level, you're kind of making the basic determination about what kind of data you want to offer, the structure of that, and what you want to track.
Great, thank you. There's just two questions here that are somewhat related, and I'm going to try to make a bridge between them. One's asking about our recommendations around when a university might consider changing a CMS. That's obviously a really big investment of time, investment of dollars, et cetera. And then there's another question just around the technology stack itself and where integration can occur there. Specifically noting, hey, yeah, we're talking about CMS and CRM, but what about all the other pieces of the tech stack as it relates to any kind of measurement, whether that's through analytics or email or other platforms there. So I'd like to kind of push these two together and say that whenever we're working with a client who's assessing either the entire tech stack or just the CMS, the primary thing that we always like to start that conversation is with the idea that the right solution is going to be the right one that your university, your in-house talent wants to maintain for the long term. The expertise of that team has to align with the platforms that you're using, or else you're going to find yourself in a situation at some point where you're unable to support that system in a way that is going to work for all of the different stakeholders across the institution. So I think that the specifics of, hey, is Drupal the right WordPress, or I'm sorry, the right CMS for your university, or might WordPress be, or might Cascade be the right solution? Any of those is going to be around what talent do you have to support that. I think that when we get to then the tech stack overall, sorry, I'll just say also, and if you're having a real problem with with something that you currently have implemented, I think that being able to take a hard look at, is this about us or is this about the platform, is the honest place that you should start that, right? Like in general, any enterprise system would probably have the features needed. And it can come down to, how was something implemented? Was it implemented right? Are there bugs in how it was implemented, or are there, some skill gaps there that you might need to address, either in how you train people or more centrally there with who is managing or overseeing the platform. when you get into the stack, though, that's all around like what do you want to measure, right? And what tools are you using? So I'd love to hear maybe a little bit from either Marcus or Scott on that. Whoever wants to grab that piece first. I know that when we think about stack, there's a lot of different technologies that can be in there, but would love to hear some of your thoughts on that as it relates to what a goal for measurement might be.
Yeah, I'm happy to hop in there. I think that when it comes to stack, expertise is really a big portion of that, right? Wouldn't recommend integrating with technologies that you're not comfortable using, because that's generally the technology that's going to work, right? If you try to put a square peg in a round hole, that's not really going to be a good procedure moving forward. Um, Also, you want to pick tools that are just really good at what they do, right? So if the team is sort of ambivalent about which way to go, you look at your business requirements, and you take stock of that and make sure you have a really good list, right? And then you can, evaluate different pieces of software, and compare and contrast. You look at pricing, you look at features, you look at workflow, all those things, and that really helps you make that decision, for how to integrate those. Some systems play better with others, some don't, right? And those are all some of these trade-offs, right? There's nothing that's absolutely perfect. So it's really a balancing act of different technologies, making sure that they just fit together in a way that's going to be seamless for your team. There's that chat GPT word, but it's actually it's actually relevant there, in a way that fits seamlessly with your team. Because with a workflow that's smooth, your team's just going to work a lot better together, and you're not going to run into the clunkiness that can happen if you don't consider those things up front.
Yeah, seamless is such a beautiful word. I hate that I have to remove it from my vernacular. Um, but yeah, to the point about how to add on, or how to build out kind of your MarTech stack, um, I think that it's important to innovate, and that there that can start small. And so with A/B testing or personalization, there's a lot of that can happen out of the box with an open source CMS with no extra tools. And I think like personalization, for example, is often just blows people's heads up because they think about the complexity involved. But the companies and institutions that I've seen be successful with personalization often just started out with like, is this a new visitor or a returning visitor, and focused on that simple kind of binary personalization and built from there. And from there, they could decide if that's working. I think whatever gets results is where you want to double down on. So I think that innovation is an important part of it, but I don't think that it necessarily needs to be like a massive, it have a massive impact on your budget either.
There's another question. Thank you, Scott. There's another question in here about the governance model at larger institutions that are not necessarily centrally managed, but have stakeholders in each of the colleges. We have a lot of experience with these types of models. I'm not sure if Tina wants to take that or Marcus wants to. There might be some relevant examples from some recent work that we've done that you could share here.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Yeah, when you have a bunch of different departments and they all have their sort of decentralized governance, a lot of this does come down to that technical foundation. So because the tech kind of determines, it's sort of like you're determining the laws of physics in your universe, right? The tech is going to ensure that, okay, this sort of thing is possible, this other sort of thing is not possible. And so when you have those guardrails, that's a really good first step, at ensuring a sort of consistency with the brand or approval workflows or any of those other things that we talked about. The tech can really help maintain that. Another thing that you'll want to do is just make sure that you have a clear policy around it. So we often help our clients draft a policy for how that works, what that workflow is. We can have policies for, well, how do you spin up a new site? for example? What is the process for that? Because oftentimes there's a lot of, just management that, has to go through IT or something, there's many parties that it may have to go through. So what's that process? How do you make sure that the site is contributing to the institution's goals? Right. And, having a process with maybe like a form that someone fills out or something along those lines is different for every institution. Um, that can really help, ensure that alignment. And then you also have, maybe a process for, well, how do you evolve the website over time, right? If you want to add new features or sections or those sorts of things, that could also be another process. And something else that we discuss with our clients is really, leading with a carrot, not a stick sometimes, right? So what are some of the incentives that we can provide with, a website redesign that would make people want to come into the fold? We're not really forcing them. They're like, oh, there's actually benefits to what we're doing here, and they can sort of see the bigger picture. And then they're like, oh yeah, this is a really good idea. And then they're just on board, right? So it's a lot of that upfront planning. It's a lot of just, creating buy-in with the rest of the institution and having the necessary infrastructure, both technical and procedural, that's really going to help with governance.
Yeah, and I think that last point you just made, Marcus, relates to the financial part of what this individual was asking also, right? If you're thinking broadly, and this is really hard for big universities, which it sounds like this individual's from, right? Hey, how do we get all of our subunits? How do we get all the colleges working together? That's going to save costs in the long run, right? Supporting multiple technology solutions wherever it is in the tech stack, let's say with the CMS or the CRM being the largest investments that might exist there. The more fragmented that is, the more technologies that are in place, the less likely the university is to be saving money over the long haul. So that ability to build something that people want to be a part of, that has the features that they need, no matter which college they're in. That's something that I think when you're talking to senior administration, when you're talking to central marketing or central IT, trying to bring those ideas forward, even if you're working in a subunit, would put you in a role where you're really trying to have a broader vision essentially for what the university can do to cut costs and at the same time have a cohesive strategy. I know we're running out of time. That's probably a good place for us to end. I'm not sure if Murray, if you have any wrap-up words here. I know that we've got some opportunities for folks to join us in the future or join our mailing list, other things of that nature.
Yeah, so we've got two thought leadership pieces coming out over the next couple of months that we would love to share with you all. So those will probably be sent out in the coming weeks. And if you did want to find out any more information on the MarTech model, where you placed when it comes to the scoring, we're really happy to provide you with those data points just to help you make that case back on campus. But let's all be hopeful that in 4 years, when we run the next replication, we're at 100% across the board. That's the goal. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate your time. And thank you to all of our panelists. Appreciate you joining. Thanks, everyone.